Good evening. I'd like to bring this regular meeting of council dated Tuesday, April 5th, 2022 to order. And I'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inca, Klapmuks, and Syilx people. There are no late items that I'm aware of. No. Public input. And I believe, Ginny, you're not on public input? No. Okay. Okay, that's what you were trying to tell me just earlier. Thank you. So I'll move on to 4.1, the adoption of the minutes. I need a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on the 22nd of March 2022 be adopted. Christofferson, Etchart. And any errors or omissions? All in favor? Opposed? None carried. We move into 5.1, the official community plan amendment bylaw 2330 and zoning amendment bylaw 2329 in the public hearing. And report out. This public hearing is convened to consider the following two bylaws: official community plan amendment bylaw number 2330 2022 and the zoning amendment bylaw number 2329 2022. The purpose of this public hearing is to allow everyone an opportunity to express their views. A public hearing is not a time for debate, but it's a chance for the public to express their opinions. Mr. Lois, who is our Director of Corporate Services, can you explain how the public were able to express their views to this hearing?
Yes, Your Worship. So we advertised that people could provide written submissions in hard copy dropped off to City Hall, provided in email, or submitted using our online portal for public hearings, or of course they could come along in person tonight, which I believe at least one person has done.
Can you confirm that the statutory advertising requirements were met?
They were, Your Worship.
Thank you. And Ms. Bradshaw, did you have any comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I could go into a brief presentation just to provide an overview for the public. So staff have prepared an official community plan amendment bylaw, which outlines one proposed change, and a zoning amendment bylaw, which outlines 96 proposed changes. All of these are outlined in detail, including an explanation of the rationale in attachment 3. The official community plan amendment bylaw consists of a deletion of the temporary use section, which will enable this to be adjusted for clarification and included in the zoning bylaw. And for the public hearing now, I'll highlight a few of the proposed zoning amendments that consist of a little more than fixing errors, adjusting wording for clarification. So in proposed change number 8, we're looking at changing brewing and distilling to brewing and distilling craft. This will include a limit to the maximum total gross floor area and total area for manufacturing. The purpose here is to ensure that the use is scaled appropriately and discourage high water consumption. In proposed change number 19, we're looking at adding an addition to the prohibited uses section, which would prohibit any use that is water consumption intensive as determined by the approving officer. So having this be determined by the approving officer allows for some flexibility as technologies and industries change and adapt to concerns like water conservation. In proposed change number 27, we're looking at adding a provision that states if a new building's exterior sidewall is adjacent to a vacant parcel or within 2.4 meters of a building on an abutting parcel and will be taller than the neighboring building by at least 1 story, the new building's blank wall may be required to include a mural at the discretion of the development approving officer. The purpose here is to reduce the occurrence of blank walls, encourage vibrancy, and add visual interest. In proposed change number 34, we're looking at enabling a single-family home swap which will allow for the creation of additional housing units in existing residential neighborhoods while ensuring that the existing residents can continue to live in the neighborhood. So in this case, a developer could partner with an existing homeowner to replace a single detached dwelling with a multiple unit dwelling, for example, a townhouse, and they would be able to receive a density bonus of 1 additional unit so long as a legal agreement is in place to enable the original homeowner to live in the new building. In proposed change number 37, we're looking at adding 2 new zones where backyard hens would be permitted in the P2 and P3 zones. So this would allow for potential educational opportunities. In proposed change 40, we're looking at removing the temporary use permit section in the official community plan and adding this into the zoning bylaw. So currently, only commercial and industrial temporary uses are permitted on areas identified for commercial or industrial uses. Deleting this and adding it into the zoning bylaw, we will be able to provide for more flexibility when reviewing and approving temporary uses, and we would no longer restrict it to only commercial or industrial temporary uses. For example, including residential temporary uses will potentially enable the placement of flood recovery housing on parcels not currently zoned for the residential uses. The change would also enable the approving officer to issue these permits, which would help to expedite the process. Just a few more. In proposed change 45, we're looking at outlining parking where parking requirements can be reduced for certain developments located in close proximity to designated transit stops. So the addition of this section would encourage multiple modes of transportation, and while it will allow for reduced parking requirements, developers or owners will still have the option to provide parking if desired. In proposed change number 51, we're looking at adjusting the landscaping section to include a requirement for a non-refundable fee in the amount of 2%. This will help to cover costs associated with landscape inspections. Then in proposed changes 80, 83, 89, 91, and 94, we're adding a provision to ensure that site development and placement of objects on parcels near the airport are done so in accordance with Transport Canada regulations for an AGN2 non-instrument aerodrome, which is the current airport classification here. Proposed change 90, we're looking at adding a discretionary use to the airport commercial zone, which would potentially allow 1 dwelling unit in an airport hangar. A concept known as hangar miniums. In proposed change 92 and 93, we're looking at making some additions to the light industrial zone. So adding storage yard as a discretionary use in order to provide businesses or parcels the option for outdoor storage or a laydown yard. And then adding a dwelling unit in an industrial building as a discretionary use as well. Similar to the hangar minium concept, this will provide the option of a live-work type of development in light industrial bays. And lastly, proposed change 95, we're looking at adding a new use to the M2 heavy industrial zone, which would be a storage yard. So again, this would allow businesses or parcels the options to have outdoor storage or a laydown yard. And staff are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
And we'll leave staff questions for the agenda. This, at this point, is public hearing for the public to give us their opinion. So is there any member of the public who wishes to make a submission? If so, please come forward, give your name and number, address. Greg's taller. Greg's a little taller.
My name is Jenny Prowl. I live at 2070 Aspen Street. I have a concern that has not been addressed by the previous council or this one. 5 years ago, the city commissioned a park and recreational master plan. So I have a concern that hasn't been addressed by anybody, actually, and it's fairly new. And that is Windy Canyon, which has been enjoyed by people forever, and as well as all that vacant land above Lindy Creek Road. Well, then a developer has come along and, has bought a large portion of that land above Lindy Creek Road and has put up a massive, big as that, sign saying private property, keep out, no trespassing, and it's quite rude. So my question now is, okay, how do we get to Windy Canyon? So I tried to find some information. Although Windy Canyon is a park, how do you get there if this development and the line is there and you can't get through? So can we come in from Midi Valley Road? How do we get there is my biggest question, and I think it needs to be addressed because it is an area that people really enjoy. Can we come in from Midi Valley? And I know that the city has the right to designate an easement that they can get into, and it's just, I find the sign quite offensive, that obviously they don't care about the public, about the city, about the area itself that is so gorgeous, and even access. They probably don't even know that there is a Windy City. So I would really like the city to address this, figure out how we can get in there and enjoy the rest of and it's really hard to tell on the maps where that new purchase ends, and it's really hard to figure out. Although I know Windy Canyon itself is designated as a park, how do we get there? And I'm hoping that city can come up with something that works. It's been used by hikers and bikers forever, and I don't know how you're going to be able to get in there eventually. So I hope you can come up with a plan so we can get in there.
Can I just ask our CAO to respond? This is probably not part of the public hearing, so we need to interrupt the public hearing.
Yeah, I didn't know where I fit.
Okay, thank you. So stick around.
Oh.
We'll get an answer for you.
Okay.
Anybody else want to speak to the public hearing? I ask a second time, if there's any member of the public who wishes to make a submission, please do so now. For a third and final time, if there are any members of the public who wish to make a submission, please do so now. I need a mover and a seconder that the bylaw 2329, 2022 and 2330, 2022 be returned to council for further consideration. Luck and Etcher. And all in favor? Opposed? None. Carried. Okay. We now move on to general matters, and we have a presentation tonight from Mary Angus. Mary, the floor is yours.
I'm glad to see you all. And my presentation is going to be on, I've spoken to our mayor on this topic, and it's signage into every artery of the city. And I would like to see Nlakapansin and Silk signage.
Excuse me, Mary, can I have you speak up a little bit? I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you.
Maybe I can do this.
Well, that goes to online.
Okay.
But in here, we need to hear you.
I see, okay. So the words that I want to see on a sign is Chachawmit to meet. That means we welcome you. Chachawmit to meet. And if you go up to NVIT, you will see this sign as you enter into the institution. And I think that it's time. We have the attention. As First Nation, we have your attention. And so I think it's going to be Merritt pride as well as the surrounding community pride to see the language in our, as you welcome visitors into the city. And then on the reverse side, as you're leaving the city, I would like to see quick chichao mintamit. We would be happy when you return. And so I think it's a really good indicator for people coming into the city. I handed out some pictures. Now, the first picture I have is of 3 generations, but I would like to see 7. And within the city or within one of the communities, I do have pictures of 6 generations. And I would like to leave the 7th generation as empty, only because it's the future. And so we have the picture of a family, but I would like to see four pictures surrounding the words, and it would be of children as our future. I have a child picking berries. I have a girl catching salmon traditionally, and I have baskets. Now those baskets are baskets in a collection. I have other baskets that I've gone down to UBC and I've gotten pictures of colored basket. This is as good as it's going to get if we have it in the sepia tone, which works really well as well. I'm thinking that the pictures do not have to be in color. They can be in sepia tone as well. They would probably last longer. One of the reasons that I've come to you is because my now ancestors, my shkikia, they said, if you want something done, you go do it yourself. Don't wait for somebody to help you, because the help isn't going to come. And so today I ask for your support in doing something like this for pride of Merritt, as well as pride from our surrounding communities. On a second note, I have pictures that I've handed out. Now, I've spoken to Smoker Marchand about this, and these are all his sculptures. You can see these sculptures down at South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and British Columbia. If you look at the first 2, they are the ones that you see as you go into Kelowna. He has them in Osoyoos as well. And I picked these pictures only because I thought they would look really good in each of the arteries as our welcome into the city and as people depart. I spoke to Sean, and He also mentioned that we could maybe even do rock sculptures. So that could also be an option. And I think I'm lost. Too much paper. Anyhow, I really appreciate your time. And if there's any other questions, our mayor has my number, and Sean has my number, Greg has my email address. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mary. This is an excellent plan for us to have signage in First Nations language. It's hopefully the beginning of our reconciliation action plan, and we are meeting with all of the chiefs, I believe the last week in June, and I don't think we have the date confirmed yet, but it'll be hopefully that last week in June, and this is going to be on the agenda. So we will be talking with them.
I would like to ask that when you meet with the chiefs, that you not just meet with the chiefs. They've got a lot on their plate. I would ask you to ask the chiefs to bring someone with them, a language speaker.
We can do that.
Thank you.
I did promise the chiefs that when we talked a year or so ago, that they wanted to be in on the decision making. So I did promise them that opportunity. So we will take it to the C2C, and we can ask that they bring somebody with them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. You're right, there is a lot of paper. Good paper though, Mary, good paper. Okay. We're moving to unfinished business. There is a notice of motion from Councillor Luck. And you announced the motion. Did you want to move it and speak? Move it, we'll get a seconder and then you can speak to it?
Yeah, sounds good.
You need your button on.
Yes, I'd like to move that council direct staff to investigate and report back on increased enforcement of unsightly properties exclusive of the flood zone at this time.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor White, seconded. And you're first to speak to it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I wanted to speak to this because we do have a lot of unsightly properties in our community, and I know we've talked about this in the past over the last 3 years, and some challenging properties out there, and I understand that and everything, but as we move forward here and cleaning up our community and that, we really need to look at some way of dealing with some of these rather unsightly. There's some that are, residential. There's some that are commercial. There's some that are industrial. And, we've heard a lot about the property up at Walters and vote up there and a few things. And what the idea of this motion was to do is to be able to find a way to investigate of finding how we can help these people facilitate cleaning up their properties. And it just so happens that it's been brought to my attention that city might have now become a culprit of this as well. The new public works yard over on Main Street there has been brought to my attention that it's a little unsightly. So if we're going to ask other people to clean up, we may have to look at doing something there as well, putting some bushing up or something like that. It was brought to my attention that that's unsightly as well. So, but we need to certainly investigate some ways of beautifying and increasing the overall appearance of our community. So that was the general intent of this this motion. I know we've been struggling with it for some time, so I hope we can find some ways to deal with some of those. But and of course I don't want to use the heavy hand or anything, and of course that gets ugly. But we got to find some way to deal with some of these. So just looking for a report if there's some ways we can deal with that. Thank you.
Councillor Etchart.
Well, I agree that we may have some properties that need a little work. We've also have people not necessarily being able to clean up everything right away. Maybe the availability of certain parts or materials or building materials or whatever the case may be, supply chain issues. We do have already a bylaw in place that's complaint based, so I think that everybody's been so busy we don't necessarily have the availability to enforce right now. So I feel like this is already being addressed, so that's why I kind of question this. The other concern that I have from some people is they kind of wonder why we're pushing this, or if it's that people are trying to sell properties for higher values, and I had somebody question me on that, so I'm touching this one very carefully. So anyway, I just wanted to say that's why I'm kind of thinking we should just think very carefully about how we approach this one. Thanks.
Councillor Fair.
I would like to echo the sentiments expressed by Councillor Etchart. I think that it's important to remember that staff and the entire city are balancing a myriad of priorities right now, and that beautification might just not be at the top of that list at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Christofferson.
Yeah, I feel a little awkward addressing this one because in the past I've often been on the complaining side of saying that we need properties cleaned up. But can we ask questions of staff on this one? Because I do believe we do have an unsightly property bylaw. It's mainly with the enforcement that it becomes difficult, and sometimes, difficult to enforce is probably the main thing. So I was just wondering if staff has a comment that they can share with us.
Can you respond?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, when this came up, I was thinking that if Council are minded to pass this resolution, then as staff, we would probably appreciate some specific direction about the type of unsightly properties you're particularly concerned about. I know you did say outside of the flood zone, so that implies non-flood damage. But so, for example, at the moment I've put up on the screen the section from the Good Neighbour bylaw, which deals with regulation of unsightly properties. The text in there at the moment states that nobody may permit their property to become unsightly. Unsightly is a defined term which, in addition to its common dictionary definition, includes things like multiple unlicensed vehicles or the presence of rotting wood, for example. Essentially, most of our response to unsightly properties is, as has been said, complaint-driven. Essentially, people make complaints, and then our bylaw team, our bylaw enforcement officer, will go out and look and assess whether or not there's a violation of the bylaw. And if so, then we have enforcement measures, such as we typically start with requesting them to bring their property into compliance. If they don't, then we require them to bring their property into compliance. And if they don't, then we do it for them, and then the bill for that is added to their property tax for that year. As things currently stand, one of the things that we're focused on at the moment, for example, I know several dozen letters have been written in the last couple of weeks to properties which are owned but not currently built on, in order to ensure that the grass gets cut before we enter wildfire season, so as to try to mitigate any concerns about that. Long grass is considered an unsightly property, and so is dealt with in there. And so if, for example, one of the concerns you were having was that there isn't enough work being done to make sure that grass is short and to keep property safe during fire season, that would probably lead to a different focus on increased enforcement than if you were concerned about, say, there's too much rotting wood, people's properties aren't being kept in a good condition, which is impacting neighbours' property values, for example. It's not necessarily that either one of those is right or wrong, it's just that depending on what the concern is, that would then lead to a different focus on what staff would look for on increased enforcement. Ultimately, of course, your almost nuclear weapon would be tightening up the bylaw itself, which is why I put that language that's currently in there up on the screen. Essentially, these are the regulations that everyone has to follow, but then within that, we do have the question of both where do we want to enforce and to what extent do we have the capacity to enforce. Because if considering that the statement in there at the moment that nobody shall cause, permit, or allow their property to become unsightly. And unsightly has, as its part of its meaning, its common dictionary definition. We could be extraordinarily heavy-handed if we so chose, but traditionally that's not been something that I don't think very many people have wanted. Of course, if council wished to instruct us to take that very literal interpretation, we could do so. I suspect that's not what you're looking for in this situation. So there are a number of potential avenues that we could go down, and of course, happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate hearing from staff on that, because my concern is unsightly is quite a general term and in the eyes of the beholder, but there are properties that I think probably a lot of us are aware of that are downright dangerous. They're contaminated, they're leaking oil, they're right by the riverbanks, and whether that's a Merritt City problem or if that's an environmental issue with the provincial government, I think I would like to see personally that our bylaw be tightened up a little bit to be a little bit more specific, but I really don't think we need a new bylaw.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor White.
I agree with the comments of everyone on this issue. However, there is one property that we've been dealing with since I started, and that's almost 4 years. And it involves a non-conforming zoning. So I don't say at this point in time it should be put at the top of the list, but it certainly, in my opinion, certainly needs to be looked after. It affects a number of residents that have to look down upon it. There's tourism involved with it, and it just carries on. And so, and then the Walter Street, I don't know how many, I mean, just about every councillor I've talked to has had a complaint about that, and that's been going on long before the flooding, and it's still there. So that's, I mean, I understand what's going on now, and it can't be maybe a priority right now, but I don't know how it should be handled. At this point, I don't know how it should be handled because of everything else that's going on around it, but I do think that it needs to be addressed, that's for sure.
And Councillor Fair.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the Public Works Yard of staff. If memory serves, I believe that we have spoken about, because the idea of expanding the Public Works Yard has been around for quite a while. And I think we've spoken before about doing some kind of beautification around the perimeter of that. So I just wanted to confirm whether or not I'm correct. And yeah, just get that feedback, please.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Fair. You're absolutely correct. And just for the public's awareness as to what's happening there right now, everything that is being moved onto that parcel is so that we can work on the main public works site, because there was damage to a number of those structures, and so in order to do that we had to get things off of the parcel, and so that's why items are being stacked there. So at this point it isn't being formally absconded to being part of the Public Works Yard. This is, and right now it's basically a laydown area so that we can actually do work in the Public Works Yard. Once that's done, then that stuff would end up being moved back. When the time does come, you're absolutely right, because I'm not in any way trying to mince words. That will be part of the plan, but it would absolutely be fenced and screened appropriately for the use, particularly given the importance of the river trail there. We want that to be a good experience for everybody and don't want it to be an eyesore. The other thing that I will say is that's definitely part of the flood zone right now, so I hope that the city would also get the same grace that everybody else gets, that during this period there is a bit of a time where stuff doesn't quite look like you would ordinarily hope it looks, because it's under a whole lot of silt and Very good points though, and I will absolutely take that back, but it is part of the plan to make sure that that would be an area that would not offend anybody.
Thank you. And I'm looking at this whole area from a budget point of view. So if we are going to let council or let staff know that we want to spend more money on cleaning up these areas, we better be prepared to hand over staff to them. And we were not all that welcoming during budget time on increases. So we're in kind of a dilemma here. Councillor Luck for a final word.
Yeah, so the cleanup piece, I know when the grass gets long, I've experienced this from clients in that, is that if the grass gets long, we call somebody to go cut the grass, and then guess who gets the bill? The owner of the lot. So when we have areas that need to be cleaned up, we simply call somebody out and have it cleaned up and then send them the bill. Or so it's not, I don't see a lot of staff time, I don't see a lot of expense to the public purse on this either. I mean, that's just one way of dealing, but that's getting pretty harsh, I understand. But there is ways around not extenuating a bunch of staff time on this as well. I know there'll be follow-up and a few things like that, but I think there is ways of dealing with some of these things. And the other thing is there is some environmental issues out there that need to be looked after as well, and that's one of the concerns. Is this is one that I think Councillor White brought up earlier as well.
Environmental issues are not part of this, I don't think. We're looking at unsightly premises, not environmental issues, I think. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think one point that I do want to clarify, and I say this because more because of the experience that I had when I was working in my previous role very closely with the bylaw officers. There is a bit of a misconception as to the time it takes on a lot of these cleanup files. I can tell you from one particular situation that anybody would have looked at and said, get in an excavator, make 5 loads with that thing, and you're done. It's over. I spent, no word of a lie, more than 100 hours on a particular file to move one pile of rubble. One pile of rubble. And it's because anytime you go onto somebody's property and force something on them, I promise you they aren't like, oh, wow, thank you very much for this. You are going to have concerns. You're stealing my stuff. Where is this going? I need to make sure. It's a really, really traumatic experience for people. And I'm not justifying that because I think that they still need to comply with the bylaws. But the time it takes for our bylaw officer, oftentimes they are there not once or twice during the course of a cleanup that takes place. They end up being there for most of it because quite often there are uncomfortable circumstances between the contractor that we've called in to clean up and the owner of property. There are often threats of legal suits. I think that in the best case scenario, you are always going to spend more than 10 hours on any cleanup file, and we do roughly 50 some odd a year as it stands. And in the worst case scenario, those can be giant files. So I don't want to minimize the importance of it in any way, but I will say that it isn't quite as easy as we ask you to do it. You send you a letter, you don't do it, boom, they're in, it's on your property taxes. There's always complications with property cleanups. So I also wanted to make the one point on environmental. Environmental of a certain threshold is dealt with by Ministry of Environment, and to some degree is outside of the city's purview, but I recognize in this particular case, just because it's might be in somebody else's jurisdiction, it's still the city's problem. Like we need to address that, and presuming I know the circumstance you're talking about, that's one where nothing has happened, and I've already spent about 2 weeks worth of work on that, and so it's they're just not easy. None of these go easily.
Thank you. Councillor Etchart, you had.
Thank you for that. The only reason that I even talk about any of the situations is I know that there have been some properties that have been a problem, and even right now, some of the properties that are unsightly are in the flood zone. So even with the current motion that we have, some of the properties that need the most work are in that flood zone anyway, would be exempt. So I think that at least having our complaint-based process right now is what we'd have to go with, because as our CO has already mentioned, the hours required dealing with these properties is already huge and time-consuming, and I don't think we have the staff power to enforce anything more than what we already have. And more than, I think what we're doing right now is what we have to continue with right now. We just don't have more stuff to put on the plates of the staff. So anyway, thank you.
I'm going to go back to you briefly. Councillor Luck.
Well, the nice thing is at least it got into the public discussion, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Your button. There's probably two ways we can look at this motion. We can either look at a deferral for some time when we're finished flood zone, then we can look at this again, or we can vote on it now. I will see that as I will vote on it now. I'm going to ask the question. All in favor? Opposed? 2, 3, 4. That is opposed. Okay. Moving on to 8.1 bylaws. We have official community plan amendment bylaw 2330 and zoning amendment bylaw 2329 that we had at the public hearing prior to the regular meeting. And I didn't introduce Ms. Bradshaw as our planning coordinator, she is our community planner. I know you. Let's say it a little louder, because my ears are getting a little old. Yeah, I'm sorry. Community planner. And you need to turn on, yeah, and then I turn the button on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as discussed at the public hearing, we're bringing forward an official community plan amendment bylaw outlining 1 proposed change and a zoning amendment bylaw outlining 96 proposed changes. These are all outlined in detail in attachment 3 with an explanation of the rationale, but I am available to answer any questions that you may have.
So this is an opportunity for council to ask questions of Ms. Bradshaw. Councillor White?
I just have one question about the brewing and distilling. What's the difference between brewing, distilling, and craft?
Can you leave your mic on until we're finished with question period? Thank you.
I can do that. So the change here, currently it's brewing and distilling. With that, there's no restriction on size. Our proposed change to make it brewing and distilling craft will have size restrictions. So it'll limit manufacturing space, the total area for manufacturing, to a maximum of 300 square meters. And then the total gross floor area would be limited to a maximum of 750 square meters. And this is just to ensure that the scale is appropriate for the locations that this use is permitted, as well as to limit the water usage and consumption involved with large-scale brewery operations.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Ms. Bradshaw? Seeing no other questions. Oh, okay. Got right in there. Councillor Retchard.
Well, I had to take advantage of the opportunity to.
You may as well.
I know that sometimes people have asked questions about neighborhoods, the single family to have the multiple use property change. Sometimes people are concerned that neighborhoods will look wildly different that are typically single family, but we still have zoning requirements and setbacks and everything, so it wouldn't really change neighborhoods or, I know that that was one question on housing that some people had brought up, to myself anyway.
Is this referring to a specific change or just in general?
Well, just in general, but mostly about the single to the multiple, what was it, 40, I think, single family.
Yeah, the single family home swap.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, you would still be required to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw in that zone. So there is still the setback requirements, height restrictions, etc. that would be involved. With that, if you're taking advantage of that provision, you would still need to follow the site requirements.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Smith, did you have a response in here?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wanting to see if you would like us during the staff question period to respond to Ginny's question about Windy Canyon that had arisen.
This would be a good time to respond now. Thanks for the reminder.
I can probably fill in any holes, but I'll defer to Mr. MacArthur for the answer there.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Ms. Prowl. Yeah, so this is a great question that Ms. Prowl has brought up around Windy Canyon, and of course, we're working on the official community plan currently and plan to release that most recent draft or revised draft to the public later this month. And in there, Windy Canyon is identified as a future park. In addition to the OCP policies that will support that future park, we are also working on two separate subdivisions right now. One of them is the property owner that you mentioned, Ms. Prowl, that has put up a sign to indicate that his property is private property. And that developer is looking to construct Hill Street from Lindley Creek to the south. There's in that proposed subdivision, there are 5 lots, 2 that front Lindley Creek Road, a third that is behind those 2, a fourth that's behind that one. The road would go all the way to lot 4, and the developer would be constructing a 10 space parking lot there. And from there, a trail access into Windy Canyon would be possible. And on the 5th parcel, that's the 24-acre park that the developer is donating or dedicating to the city. And on that park site, there is an archaeological site as well that the city would like to work with First Nations to make sure that that site is identified and that signage is there, etc. So though that trail system would be able to access that area. The adjacent property, which will be on the other side of the new Hill Street, is currently zoned for industrial use, but we're doing a subdivision there as well, and the developer there is proposing to give a dedication to the city, which would provide an access route off of Midday Valley Road, also to Windy Canyon. So we would have access routes to Windy Canyon from 2 directions. So staff are working on both of those files currently. Neither of the subdivisions is finalized, but we do continue to work towards that.
Thank you. Are you good with that answer? Okay, thank you. And Councillor Christofferson.
Good, thank you, Your Worship. My question goes back to Councillor Etchard's question about the if a single family dwelling is replaced by multiple dwellings and so on. What provisions, I wasn't sure I could find it here. What provisions are being made for parking when because that can be a concern in residential neighborhoods if a single family dwelling is replaced by 4 or 5 units. Where do the people park? So is parking part of this process that they have to provide on-site parking?
I see both heads nodding there, yes.
Yes, parking requirements will still be in place as per the zoning bylaw, so that will not change with this new provision.
So they would have to have a driveway somehow to have access through the property, would they?
Yeah, they would need to provide parking as per the requirements. So depending on the zone, there are different parking requirements involved, and those would need to be met as well.
Yeah, because I think for single dwelling right now, you have to have a minimum of 2 parking spaces, do you not? Or
It depends on the zone. Sorry, I know that's not a great answer, but in the R2 zone, for example, it would be 1 stall per dwelling unit, but that could change in the R1. It's different, but those requirements would need to be met.
okay, the only reason I ask is that very often down in the bigger cities, on-street parking becomes a real nightmare if it isn't legislated into action that parking has to be provided on site. And we've had cases throughout the various parts of the city where parking has been misused and 5 spots out on the street and so on. So, thank you. I'll rest assured that it's in capable hands.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions for staff? Or does staff, Councillor Richard.
The only reason mine isn't so much a question, but going back with the homes, is that I just wanted to have that discussed so that people understand a little bit about, if that things could change with this, because when we had the apartment question that came up for Walters, people were really worried about the parking situation that we were going to have along Reed Avenue. So for a lot of residents, they're concerned with traffic and parking. So what Councillor Christopherson was addressing was something that we've already kind of gotten a lot of comments on before. So I know the zoning would have to reflect that, and so with all the changes, there's so many, so the list is long, so it's hard to find information, but generally in residential, people would have a driveway per residence, would they not? In R1, as an example.
Yes, so I can go through a few of the changes to the parking section. So when it comes to driveways, there is a section that outlines parcel access. So you would have parcel access for a residential parcel, and there are maximum widths for driveways. So 6 meters is the maximum width of a driveway, and the reason for that is to make sure that there is space on the street for parking, so that it's not just driveways along the whole street. There is room for street parking. We are changing that in one section to just to address the case of duplexes or semi-detached dwellings. So you don't have 2 6-meter wide driveways. It would be 3-meter wide driveways in that case. So that is another area where we're trying to address the concern with street parking, is in making some adjustments to the parcel access section.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. Really do want to make this as clear for council, because council is often the biggest amplifiers of these programs when the time comes. So you understanding it is really important. I think the biggest take home here is, as Janice said, all of the zoning requirements still apply with this. Think of it as a density bonus, if you will. It's an alternate form of density bonusing. So if you don't have the width to meet setback, you're still going to have to shrink the number of units that are potentially available in that lot. This is only a bonus that is available if you can make it work with every other requirement that is already in place within the zoning bylaw. So it is true that our requirements are less than they used to be, so you can do things perhaps with a little bit more parcel coverage than you historically used to have, or your lot sizes or your setbacks are in some instances smaller than they used to be. And so this isn't to say that this won't be a change for our community. I don't want to undersell what's happening here, but it is a bonus where everything else still has to be met in order to enjoy that bonus. Is that a fair way of saying it? Okay.
Yep. Seeing no other questions, then I'll need a mover and a seconder that council give third reading to the official community plan amendment bylaw number 2330, 2022. Luck and Christofferson. And this is the shorter version, the OCP. Anybody want to speak to this? Councillor Fair.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I really appreciate the questions that came from the rest of council and the responses from staff. I think it shows how well thought out that this is, and that it, identifies some key ways that we can be flexible to allow for a growing population in a limited amount of space to add density and create more homes for people that need it. So I think this is a positive.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None. And I need a mover and a seconder that council give third reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 2329, 2022. Etchart and White. And it's open for discussion. All 96 changes. Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None. That too is carried. We move on to 8.2, the amendment to the officer designation and delegation of authority bylaw. Mr. Lois.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a proposed change to, say, the officer amendment and delegation of authority bylaw. Essentially, while a vast amount of power is vested in you by legislation, it would be incredibly awkward to get you to do everything, which is why you have professional staff. And the bylaw that you've passed allows, sets out so that various officers can do various of your statutory responsibilities that you have authorized, and that it sets out the parameters within which actions can be taken. Unfortunately, due to a staff change, one of the sections is a little now incorrect. The Director of Engineering, I think, is the role which is described in the bylaw, which hasn't existed for at least a year now. So it's not quite typo cleanup, but essentially it's a proposed modification to reflect the existing staff structure. The actual substantive change that we're proposing to bring forward at this point is the new section 7.1.5. The zoning bylaw that you just gave third reading, it moved forward the new proposals for temporary use permits, and we're proposing that this be the power to issue those temporary use permits be then delegated to the Director of Planning and Development in accordance with the city's zoning bylaw. Section 493 of the Local Government Act specifically covers the delegation of TUPs, and one of the things it says is that if that power is delegated, then the applicant, if they are unsuccessful, they must retain a right of appeal to council. So ultimately, this wouldn't fetter your decision in any way. If someone was rejected, they could simply come to one of these meetings and ask you. So essentially, we are asking for efficiency's sake that you change the bylaw in order to give Mr. MacArthur the power to take those delegated decisions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Mr. Smith.
I would like to add, Your Worship, that most of the time you can get away without TUPs. They're not a super commonly used instrument. It's become much more common as a result of our flood circumstances, because there are situations where certain people have been displaced. One example, and I hope I'm not overstepping, but one example here is Strachan Child and Family Services, where they were displaced from the school district property because the school needed to operate there, didn't really have a few options to go. So they've recently put in an application, or in the process of putting in an application for a TUP to operate at the old topo offices, where again, in the long run, does it make sense that these parcels would be used for office purposes, or probably not, definitely not, but on a temporary basis where folks are trying to make do and find solutions, we are proposing to bring this forward, and as an efficiency point, again, we're asking for that authority, but we want you to know that if there is any concern, we're absolutely happy to bring these on an ad hoc basis to council. Just makes it easier if we have the ability where we think it's logical to do it on our own. So.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Will that designation be permanent once it's?
No, temporary use permits have restrictions on how long they can last.
No, the permits themselves, but giving the designation to the staff.
Yes.
Is that permanent?
The proposal is to amend the delegation bylaw, so the delegation to allow the Director of Planning and Development Services to make these decisions would last until you next change the bylaw.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I understand these are temporary use permits. What is the approximate timeline for use of one of these? Do we put a timeline on them? For one question.
Thank you. So the timeline is you've got a 3-year statutory maximum that you can run TUPs for, but what we would be proposing to do as a matter of course is to only do 1 year, and I think that everybody we've talked to on a tentative basis, even whether this is coming to council or not, this is what we would be recommending, is 1 year with the option for a right of renewal for up to 2 successive 1-year terms, so that if there is an alternative use that comes up in that time, nobody's locked in for such a period that it would potentially hamstring development of parcels, but it would also allow some degree of use of parcels that would potentially not see use in that period. So.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. You answered my second question that I had about for you as well. How many times can we renew one of these permits as well? So this is temporary. Statutorily, we can do them up to 3 years, but we're proposing. Did I hear you correctly? Okay.
I think it's.
Looks like Mr. Lois is.
I think it's only a renewal once, isn't it?
One renewal. The date the permit expired. 3 years after the permit was issued.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's 3 years or earlier if you state otherwise.
But it is only one renewal.
Maybe renewed once.
Yeah.
But we're proposing 1 year with 2 renewals. Is that what is that what we're posing for our bylaw? Just confirming. But only once, yeah. So when that says renewed only once, does that mean 6 years?
No, you don't get to.
Yeah.
So do we have to do it for 18 months?
I would see that as.
Yeah, we're gonna need to talk to you guys about this one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We could have a fun staff jab about statutory interpretation. It's going to be awesome.
We're proposing to do what our OCP currently does, so, but we can chat about this.
Yeah.
But the feeling I'm getting is we're not having to worry about this has become permanent or anything like that. There's checks and balances here that if we need the property and rezone property, somebody comes in, we have those outs. So that's what's the most important piece, right?
From what I understand, it's never permanent unless they have a temporary permit use.
It isn't
when
permanent,
it's expired,
but
it has
you
to
do
be
raise a point that my contemporary understanding of how these work, and again, I need to make sure that we follow the chain of those definitions. I think I understand what sub 3 is saying in there, that it isn't allowing for up to 6 years. I think it's saying that all has to be within sub 1 of maximum of 3, but you are dead correct that you're only allowed 1 renewal. So
do we need a motion to table this, or do we okay with it?
Either way, we have
need
to
to come
follow
back.
the legislation, because we can't do anything you can't do.
That's
And
right.
so but you are correct that our 2 renewals approach is not going to be.
Not going to work, may not work.
And it is worth noting, if you were concerned about whether or not we have a sufficiently clear explanation about how this would operate, that you, because you're not allowed to adopt a bylaw on the same day that it receives third reading. In this situation, there are some where you can, but not this one. If you wanted to advance it to 3 readings and then not actually give final approval until you had a satisfactory answer, that's also an option that's available to you.
That
I'm
would be,
okay with that one.
that would be the one I'm
I'm okay
gearing
with that
towards.
option. Yep. As long as we get clarification, I'm okay with that. Thank you for the.
I love it. You guys totally rocked us on this one. There isn't too often where we get annihilated, but council just beat us.
Thank you for that somewhat interesting discussion.
Okay. So any other questions? Any other pointers for staff? Okay, I'm going to call a question for that council read amendment to officer designation and delegation of authority bylaw number 2331/2022 a first time. Christofferson, Etchart, any comments? All in favor? Opposed? None. And that council read amendment to officer designation and delegation of authority bylaw number 2331/2022 a second time. Luck and Etchart, all in favor? Opposed? None. And a third reading, that council read amendment to officer designation and delegation of authority bylaw number 2331/2022 a third time. Fair and White. And all in favor? Opposed? Opposed? None. Carried. That was interesting. Okay. The vote's already over.
I know,
Go
but-
ahead.
So is this done now, or?
No,
Okay.
no, they're gonna come back with a revision, and we will look at approving it at another time. But we can't do all 3 and approval at the same time.
Okay, I get it.
Mr.
Thanks.
Smith.
Yeah, we get a chance to save a little bit of face on this one, Councillor White.
Okay. And we're going to move on to new business, 9.1, health and wellness policy. Mr. Smith, you're on.
Thank you, Your Worship. What we are proposing is an amendment to the existing, what is called the health and wellness policy, or the employee wellness policy. We're proposing retitling it as the health and wellness policy and combining that with what is currently the fire rescue and auxiliary RCMP wellness policy. So the short of it is we have 2 different policies that largely cover the same material, but for different people with slightly different perks. It's really weird. I'm just going to call it like it is. So as it stands right now, any city employee is entitled to attend the Nicola Valley Aquatic Center gym and pool free of charge, but not their families. Whereas the policy 6.01, which is for the Fire Rescue Department Auxiliary RCMP, that allows them to attend as well as their families to attend. So what we're proposing here is a policy that smushes all that together and broadens this to allow members of the municipality and their families to attend the Nicola Valley Aquatic Center. We are also including the Nicola Valley Memorial Arena during public skating times as part of that. And we are seeking authority to establish any additional health and wellness initiatives so long as they support the objectives of the policy and are consistent with your financial plan bylaw. So if it's budgeted and cleared with you in advance. The reasoning on this is twofold. One, it's a really low cost way to be able to provide some incentive for families. And this is coming from some of the feedback that we've heard from others that they want things for their families to be able to do as part of a retention perspective, but we also think that this is important for mental health and wellness. And so oftentimes people will say, I would go, but I'd only go with my family. And when I still have to pay for my family, it's not really all that much of an incentive anyways. So we don't have the exact cost for what we believe the implementation of this initiative would be, because we don't keep stats on family members that attend, but we anticipate it'll be somewhere between 500 and 5,000. We also think that there's a pretty good chance that if that results in one person even sticking around or attracting one person where you otherwise wouldn't have because of broadening of this policy, that the recruitment or turnover costs could offset the additional costs for implementation of the policy. The other thing that I would say with this is we recognize that we are in a really tight environment, both from taxation, but from wage growth and increases, and we're looking at how can we provide benefits to people that are going to be meaningful, that are maybe not always on a salary. So this is one way that we think that we can appreciate and recognize employees for what they do, without it increasing the costs to the taxpayer, because it's an already existing city facility, again, with the exception of any revenue that families currently spend that they would now be getting for free. So there is still some cost. I don't want to undershoot that, but I do want to make it clear that there wouldn't be any additional staff time, being employment costs that would be required in order to facilitate this policy, because it would only be available during otherwise publicly available hours. So open to any questions.
Council, do you have questions for Mr. Smith?
It's just questions, or can I say what I think?
It's questions this time. You can say what you think as soon as we move some. There are no questions, so I'm looking for a mover and a seconder that council adopt Health and Wellness Policy 313 as amended, and that council rescind Fire Rescue and Auxiliary RCMP Wellness Policy 6-01. Christofferson and Etchart. Any council? Councillor Christofferson and then Councillor White.
Simply because it's helpful to families that are employed by the city, and it encourages good health, family time together, and at very little, if any, cost to the municipality, since the facilities are already in use. So very much in favor of it, and hope it does a good job of helping.
Councillor Fair.
I'll echo what Councillor Christofferson has said. I think it's a great value when you're looking at retaining people that we need here. The only thing that occurred to me is that it could possibly put it in a position where some of the public might feel underserved by their having to pay when city staff don't. But as I said, when you're looking at value, the taxpayer is getting great value from retaining good people in this way, instead of having to just put money towards the bottom line through salaries. So I think everybody wins.
Thank you. And Councillor White.
For me, I think when we're talking about mental health, we've got a whole community that's having mental health issues right now. We've got about 1,000 people out there that are in mental health crisis. I'm not against this program, but I think the timing of it for right now is not the right time. And I would like to see it come back to the table at a later date when the community is more straightened out and especially the displaced residents that know what's going on in their lives. And then I think it would be more appropriate to bring something like this forward. But right now, I think it's wrong timing. So I can't support it right now.
Are you asking for a deferral?
Yes.
So you move for a deferral?
I would like to move for a deferral for it to be brought back at a later date.
And we need a seconder for that? Okay, And there's no debate on deferral, so I'm going to call a question. Yes?
Just noting, Your Worship, under Section 15C of the Procedure Bylaw, 15C2, items may not be deferred indefinitely and must resume at a later specified date.
Okay, thank you.
To make my life easier planning agendas.
Can we add a date to that? Ms. White?
April. How about more like June or July?
Pick a date.
July.
July what meeting?
July 19th is the only meeting in July.
Okay, July 19th it is. And does the seconder confer with that, Kate? And do we want, no, we can't speak to this. We have to vote. All in favor of deferring? Okay, this is, can we try that again? All in favor of deferring it? Okay, the two opposed? That's carried. Okay, so that, we're not deferring it. Defeating it. We're defeating it. Thank you. That's the word I want. Did you want to speak to the recommendation?
No, I wanted to speak to the original motion. Which
It is back to that.
Yeah. Small advances that we can do to aid people's mental health so that they can release endorphins of using the pool or exercise, I think is a positive right now. And I agree, the community is suffering a lot of anxiety and mental health issues right now, and I think we really need to work to try and do anything we can to help these people at the lowest cost possible, and I think this is an easy way. We have lots of things that we can hopefully encourage people to do in the future, different groups with spring coming, arts and culture, and try and encourage any positive things that we can, and I think this is just one small thing that we can do for the staff's families to encourage that. So that's why I support this. Thank you.
And Councillor White, are you still wanting to speak to this? Any other council want to speak to this at this moment? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? You're opposed? Okay. White opposed. And that's carried. On to 9.2, Emergency Executive Committee and Emergency Program Coordinator appointments. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am going to present this, but I want to make a note as well that after this item, if it would be okay by resolution of council, we would like to revisit the zoning bylaw, which has just been given third reading, because your very astute observation may have conflicted with one of the items in relation to TUPs that we had in there. So we'll do that one after this, if that's okay. Okay.
Yep.
So this is something that I think has been, it's been a long time coming, Mayor and Council. The city has an emergency measures bylaw, which is one of the bylaws we are going to be revisiting as part of our experience here. It's generally consistent in most communities, and one of the two things that it does is it requires the formation of an emergency executive committee. I've listed the primary functions of the Emergency Executive Committee in this report, but the short of it is the biggest thing they do is look at the city's planning work, the training programs, to understand what's happening in the world of emergency management. So you've got a look under the hood of what's happening, particularly with your staff team, but also the plans themselves to ensure that they are being updated and that they have the necessary information to support whatever a modern iteration of an emergency can look like. Many of our plans right now, as you saw in our last committee of the whole, are being either written, rewritten, or amended as a result of our most recent experience, but we want to make sure that council is rightly at the foresight or at the forefront of leading the emergency program for the city, and so establishment of this emergency executive committee is what that will really do. So we are asking that council appoint 2 members to that. The other members that are part of this committee by virtue of position are the emergency program coordinator, whom we are asking you to formally appoint Krista Minar, who's been acting in that capacity for the past year, as well as the administrator, which is myself. So we're wanting to do this because we've got a freshet plan that we would love to be able to roll out to the emergency executive committee well in advance of freshet. So this will be part of that initiative.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder that council appoint Councillor Adam Etchart and Councillor Kurt Christofferson to the Emergency Executive Committee. And all in favor? Opposed, none. That's carried. And that council formally appoint Krista Minar as the city's emergency program coordinator. So that would be Christofferson, Etchart. And all in favor? Opposed, none. Carried. Okay, thank you. That brings us to notices of motion. Oh, that does not bring us to that. I have forgotten already, within 2 minutes. We're now going to reopen the zoning bylaw, just the zoning one? And are we talking about first, second, and third? Yes.
So my recommendation for how to deal with this, Your Worship, is that you exercise your right under Section 26 of the Council's Procedure Bylaw, mayoral reconsideration, where you may require Council to reconsider any item it has already considered at the same meeting or in the preceding 30 days. That they should fairly cleanly reopen the item so that I mentioned the fun of statutory interpretation. Your staff have been running around the room basically since this was brought up. So if I just throw up on the wall at this point, and I'm just assuming you're exercising Section 26
I am
right
exercising
stand,
that authority to reconsider.
So the issue that we face is one of the proposed changes to the zoning bylaw was Section 4.43.3. Temporary use permits may be issued for 1 year and may be extended up to a maximum of 2 times for 1 year periods each time. Unfortunately, as was flagged in the Local Government Act, it explicitly says you can only make a renewal once. This was due to reliance on antiquated language from our existing bylaw, which is not the first time that's got us into trouble. So we are proposing that you move an amendment to the zoning bylaw. Under the Local Government Act, you can amend a zoning bylaw after the public hearing, so long as it does not alter, I'm just trying to remember the list now, but it's use, density, or some other things without the consent of the landowner, etc. Because this is just a text amendment to a delegated authority, it doesn't trigger any of those issues. So you can do this amendment without a subsequent public hearing. So our proposal is that you either delete the language entirely and make it consistent with the Local Government Act. The issue with that is that for both better and worse, there would then be absolutely no guidance on how that should be exercised other than in accordance with the Act. Or alternatively, the Planning Department are proposing that it be amended to read, temporary use permits may be issued for up to 18 months and may be extended to a maximum up to a maximum of 1 time for a maximum period of an additional 18 months. That would mean that a temporary use permit would be issued for no more than 18 months at a time, could be renewed a maximum of once as is allowed under the Act. The renewal, even if both times were the maximum, would be 18 months, and 18 months is 3 years, which is the maximum under the Act. And therefore we are fully LGA compliant, and this would be a good change to make, in our view, as staff.
And does anyone on council have any questions for Mr. Lewis? Yes.
The answer is we do. We're trying to.
Councillor Fair.
Just hopefully what's a simple clarification question. So how would we execute permits? Would it simply be an 18, it says up to 18 months, so you could start anywhere, I suppose. Are there smaller, how small of the increments could you go?
Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Councillor Fair, through your worship. Yeah, so in theory, you could do anything from a day up to 18 months. But I know from experience, 6 months and 1 year are very common times. So 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, those would be options. And that gives flexibility as well for the applicant, because sometimes they don't want or need 18 months. So having the language up to allows us some flexibility there.
Yeah, that's good. I think because typically people ask just for what they need and not be excessive or anything. So I think that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Etchart.
No, I agree with the change. Having the up to 18 months is a safe way, and it's a good thing that you thought of that, eh? That you had that idea change. No, I'm just kidding. The ungoof. What a good solution.
And here you thought I was just a pretty face.
Well, good thing I was wrong. That's great. Thank you.
Slam. Well, I deserved that, I suppose. Yeah, I did walk right into it. So any other questions for staff? I need a mover and a seconder that we give third reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 2329.
Nope,
No?
sorry, your worship. Okay. Yes.
We haven't rescinded the third one.
Correct. So what I would recommend you do is first rescind bylaw 2329 2022's third reading. And then you amend the bylaw and then you read it third time as amended.
Okay. Yep. So that I need a rescind, that council no longer do third reading, rescind third reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 2329 2022. A mover and a seconder. I think that was Etchart and Fair. And I'm not even going to ask anybody to ask questions on this. But if you feel so compelled, please jump to it. Okay, so all in favor on the rescind? Opposed, none. We've rescinded it. Now we need to amend the zoning bylaw to 4.43.3. The temporary use permits may be issued for up to 18 months and may be extended up to a maximum of one time for a maximum period of an additional 18 months. Mover? Etchart, Christofferson and Luck. And any comments on this one? I'll quickly say all in favor. Opposed, none. And now we, council, give third reading to an amended zoning amendment bylaw number 2329 2022. Etchart, Luck, all in favor? Opposed, none, carried. Does that work?
Thank you, your worship.
Okay. And that brings us to the notices of motion.
Can I provide one comment on that, your worship?
Yep.
One, I wanted to say that the night and day difference between how council just rounded that one out versus beginning of term, kudos to you guys. That was very, very impressive. Second, I would really like to thank staff for coming up with quick jive, because that is a lot easier to deal with at this meeting than it would have been after that. So thank you guys for your patience. We both apologize for our error, and we recognize it, but we really do appreciate your flexibility there.
No need to apologize, and thank you for doing the back work, or whatever you call it, while we continued the meeting. So that was good. Thank you. Yeah. Notices of motion. I'll try that one more time. Calling once, twice, third. Okay, not seeing any reports from council. Anybody have any pressing news that they want to provide? No. Okay. Information items. We don't have any, and this brings us to termination of the meeting. Thank you for coming to the meeting, and this terminates our meeting.